we are going to discuss security. Well, as far as the data warehousing security is not necessarily data warehousing security on itself. You have Windows security, we have web-based security, we have SQL security, and also we have analysis server security. There are a variety of different security factors that you have to take in account. They're accounted for. So the first section is talking about analysis services security. The first thing we have to consider is not allowing everybody to go and change the infrastructure of our analysis server. They call that administrator security. We make sure that we only allow people who are eligible to go and change the server properties. Then, by the time it comes to the cube itself, we do want some people to be the owner of that cube. So you would like to go ahead and give capabilities, like for reprocessing the cube, changing the dimensions, and so forth. So you have to change the hat as being an administrator or giving the full authority for a particular department's manager to own that cube itself if they have already taken the training for this, data warehousing. Also, you could go with the dimension security. You could specify who can use that particular dimension, who cannot, for data accessibility, as well as the cell security. Not necessarily you would like to show all the data to everybody. And maybe special options, like for example, who can do what? Customizing it, in other words. As far as understanding the administrator security, you have to consider that administrator security is based on Windows 2000 or Windows NT 4.0 security. So the user who installs the analysis services is automatically placed into a particular administrator group. In the case, if you have Active Directory, there would be a specific user account gets created. As you see on this machine, I don't have an Active Directory, but I do have a local security itself. If you have an Active Directory, you have to search for that group under Active Directory user and computers. As you see, there is a particular group got created by the time that you have installed our analysis services. If I click on it, there's administrator as a member. So whoever has installed OLAP services automatically will be placed in that particular group. It happened that I've logged on as an administrator when I did my installation. That's why I'm a member of that. So any additional administrators that you would like to have, you need to add them into OLAP administrators. All administrators have identical privileges, so you can't say this administrator is different from the other. An administrator returns full access privilege when connected through a client. That means you can do everything. You can delete a cube, you can add a cube, you can process a cube, name it. Anything that you can do as an administrator, everybody can do. So that's why you have to be careful about who is going to be a member of that group. As far as the user authentication, either you directly connect or you go from, for example, a web client. In the case of direct connection, a user connects to an analysis server directly, and authentication is based on credential granted in the user account that you have within your domain. As far as the HTTP connection, you get authenticated via your web server, which is in this case IIS. We assume is IIS. And then a user connects to analysis server through IIS by using HTTP, and analysis server relies on IIS authentication. So if you want to discuss the authentication on the domain itself, you have to go and set permissions and privileges on the domain itself. On the IIS, you need to go to Internet Information Server or IIS management utility, and for the website that you're communicating with, you have to go and select the properties for it, and there is a security tab, directory security, and then for the anonymous access and authentication control, you could choose to see who can really access it. Everybody, anonymous access, which is mapped to one single account. They call it iuser_computer name. In this scenario, my computer is London. You could go with the integrated Windows authentication, means whoever is already a member of our domain can really be authenticated. Otherwise, you don't allow that. And then, of course, basic authentication, which is pretty much sending username and password in a clear text, which is not the best technology, but the reason they still cover that, because that's pretty much a free independent. In other words, it's an independent browser, independent capabilities of authentication. Macintosh, Netscape, Microsoft, everybody supports that. And probably say, okay, what do I do with it? Because I'm sending the password, as a clear text. So you have to use SSL or Secure Socket Layer in conjunction with that, and makes it a unique way of authenticating. So by the time we're talking about authentication, you have to understand that you have to first get the information for a particular server on your domain, and also authenticate the user either based on a particular, let's say, user account credential, or based on a user verification on the IIS machine itself. After you did that, after you allowed the person to connect to your analysis server, now you have to check their credential on that database itself. So we do that by going through the database roles. Database roles are not different from those of SQL, but they're a little bit different in regard to their capabilities of the analysis. So let's first talk about how to define a role. What is a role? A role is used in order to grant access to analysis services database, or cube. So you have actually two sets of roles. Either you have a database role or you have the cube role. Very similar to the concept of SQL Server roles. You have a server role versus database role. Here we have a database role versus a cube role. So they must be created. They are not existed by default. Just they are a little bit different of those in SQL itself. Cannot be shared across multiple databases. And obviously each database is kind of independent. They're automatically created at the database level if you create the role at the cube level. So you don't have to create one for database, one for cube. You can just create for the cube, automatically get it on the database also. And then they are managed in the database role manager and the cube role manager. The picture, as you see in here in this slide, really shows how to go and work with the database role manager itself. In order to create a new database role manager, I'm just switching to the analysis manager in here. And as you see, I don't have any database role right now. I can right click in here and say manage roles. Automatically opens up the database role manager for me. So as you realize, I can choose a role for everybody, and I can enforce it on the client, or I can enforce it on the server side if I want to. As you see, if I select edit the database role, this would be changing into server rather than client. The difference between the two here is that if you enforce the server role, every client will follow that role. If you go with the client role, that means you're checking the security on the client side rather than the server side. So there's a difference between the two, which we're going to get into it in more detail. So the roles can be either on the client or server side. By default, roles are enforced on the client. The client enforcements provide superior performance because you don't traverse the network. So you're actually checking right there before you even allow connection. But of course, it increases the risk of unauthorized access. So you should go with the server if security is extremely important for you, and pretty much sacrifice the performance a little bit. So as far as the membership, by default you can allow everyone, or you can add a new user right off your domain. And then as far as the cubes that you allow, by default you can allow everybody for that database, or you can say no, only, for example, allow HR. Everyone can see HR, not the rest. We haven't talked about mining models. We have already have a chapter for it. We're going to discuss that. But you can also set the security for the mining models, and of course the dimension. By default, you can allow all dimensions to be, for example, red. You can go with fully restricted, and they don't allow the read to happen, or you could go with custom, and then you can actually choose the custom setting in there and specify what is it that you want. For example, only level 2 and level 3, for example. As you see, this chart, it shows you what's going on. As far as the advanced, you could also put the custom MDX expression for the security, what levels you want to see. Or you could enable or disable a particular visual tools. Enabling the visual to determine whether displayed aggregated sales values are calculated according to the viewable members. So you can actually make sure that what you can do with that dimension by the time you're dealing with it is a very sophisticated security mechanism for every single individual let's say dimension that you have, and according to each dimension you could specify what you want. There's a lab in which you're going to work with this, and you're going to apply security for yourself. You could also duplicate that and name it as a, for example, new role in here, and automatically you're going to get the second role, and you could inherit that way from a particular role that you already have into a new one, and then change the values on the new one and have a totally brand new role, rather than just wasting the time and having two different roles to be created from scratch. Remember that the role name cannot exceed more than 50 characters, and of course here the restricted dimensions, you could actually set them right in here, directly jumps there. You could also set the description and so forth. So as you realize, working with the database role allows you to go and pretty much apply security for for the analysis server itself. You could, right now as a legend, you could show all rows, or you could show containing users, or you could show containing the cubes, or you could show rows assigned to the mining models. Automatically it's going to show it. At this point of view, I'm just going to show all rows. Again, you can select on every single one of them and click on edit and get back to it. That was just the database row. And as you see, I'm going to have that database rows selected in here. I don't think I've saved it, so let's go back here again. I think I did save it, but for some reason my database is not showing it. My database role should be available. It shows it in the metadata, but it doesn't show it as a hierarchy. Now on the cube itself, I can right click and say manage rows. And that, it actually shows the database rows, but it can also apply it to the cube row. But the difference between the two here is that you get another option for cell itself. In other words, you can actually put the security cell. You could actually go and say advanced and simply change that to be a custom security. And you could specify what kind of permission do you want to have on that particular cell. What kind of MDX expression you allow people to run. Not to mention that, again, you have the summary information of what has happened. And then as far as the option, you can allow drill through. You can set the security right in here. Allow linking to this cube. You could disable that. Allow sending SQL queries to this cube. You don't want anybody else to go from outside and access this information from the client side. So it's more sophisticated in comparison with the value. You can also test the role. Automatically opens up a browser, and you can actually see if your security works or not. And usually by the time you do test role, is actually using the anonymous user account. So once again, if I wanted to go and modify the membership, for example, or the dimension itself, if I go to custom and choose the custom setting, I'm going to get this dimension security. On the dimension security, you have the basic tab, which actually has a select sensitive or visible levels, allow you to specify the top and bottom levels, which is it that you are going to select. Also allows you to select members. You could just select all members or deselect all members and then choose the one that you want. And of course, as far as the advanced tab, you have the data input and data output, as you see in here. You have the top level, you have the bottom level. If you don't want to deal with the graphical, they have given you the advanced or kind of complicated, calculated way of reaching the information within your dimensions. You have separate MDX statement for top and bottom. You have separate MDX statement for allowed member and denied member. So it gives you more flexibility if you can choose what you want. Like for example, you want to combine these two or get the, for example, differences between these two values. You could actually apply them in here. And then on the common tab, you have visual tools, as I mentioned. When you enable these property members that are hidden because of the dimension security are not included in an aggregation. So when you don't enable the visual tool property, a parent member value may not equal the value of its visible children. So this is very important. This is very similar to the visible property that we were talking about and disabled property that we were talking about in there. So remember that when you hide dimension members, you normally enable the visual tool property to prevent these problems from occurring. So remember that when the visual tools are disabled, which is the default, users may be able to deduce the values for hidden members. So you just have to make sure that you're showing or not showing or doing the customized version of it. Again, the default member allows you to choose a particular member by the time they're opening the cube and they're browsing it. So I have a demonstration in which I'm going to show you how to work with a new database row. So let's go down in here. Let's cancel everything in here. I'm just going to get rid of my database row. On the food mart database, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down in here and select manage row. I have already created a new role in here. Let's go and edit it. I've already created it, so I can't change the name anymore. Now this time I choose this to be on the server side. And of course, as far as the membership, I'm going to go and add a brand new membership for it. And I'm just going to go and choose, for example, this group right down in here, like power users or OLAP administrators only. So I have this particular group. And then I click OK. Now here, part of the role itself, I can actually select the cubes tab and then pick up only HR. I only allow HR to be viewed. And then I click OK. and then I click OK on the property page for the database role. As soon as it comes up. So after I'm done, I click close, and now if I click on HR, metadata, as you see, is telling me all available information for the security itself. For the role, it says that I have 2 roles, all users and new role, that I've created it. So now let's go back and take a look at the cube role once again. The cube role manager is a little bit different. We have to come down in here, and part of the cube role itself, I have to right click on a cube, like in this case HR, and say manage role. Part of the manage role capabilities, I can actually go and choose a particular cube to be like protected, or a particular cell to be protected, and so forth. So as far as the working with this role manager, as I mentioned, you could create a new cube role, call it anything you want. For example, I'll call it my cube role, and then make it to be client side or server side. Is totally up to you. And then of course you can add membership to it. I add everybody in it, and on the dimension I can specify what dimension do you want to restrict, or what cell you want to restrict, or what option you want to restrict, and so forth. So recall that part of the dimension security, the cube interface is almost identical to the database interface, no difference in there. You can define dimension security for shared and private dimensions, part of the cube, but part of the database you could have only selected for shared. Cell security, it is almost pretty much restricting the read and write, or advanced capabilities of it, that you can do customization on it. Now let's go back in here and take a look at the cell property. If I change this to be advanced, as you see, you could go with the custom settings right in here and choose what you want to have as far as the read permission. So you have a read permission, which determines the cell that users can view, and then you could have read write itself. For the read write, you could also go with customize to see what MDX expression you want. You see there are 3 different permissions. Read allows people to read the information. Read write pretty much determines the cells that the user can update, not necessarily just read. And then read contingent. Using this particular properties, you could actually go and control to see if the cells derived from restricted cells are viewable by users. So cells that are viewable, if they're derived from viewable cells, and they're not if they're not coming from viewable cells. In other words, if your cell is calculated from a cell that is restricted, what are you going to do with it? So if you're getting it from a viewable cell, you allow them to see it. If you're not allowing to see it. So they call it contingent. So if the advanced cell security role for the read contingent or read write permission is unrestricted, like this one, either or, of course, either or of these two, if they're like unrestricted, you can create custom role for the read permission right there. And then of course, if the setting that we have for the read contingent and read write automatically would be fully restricted if you pretty much restrict the read. So read is most important thing. If you don't have read, you can't be able to read neither read contingent or read write. That's pretty obvious. In regard to administration options, as far as the administration option in here, you can use custom settings using MDX statement in order to define viewable and restricted cell. And there are some commonly used security MDX functions that they give you a hint. Course 2093 really gets into the entire MDX functions, but current member, ancestor, and name, they are commonly used MDX for security itself. Especially cube security options, you have allow drill through, which you allow or disallow, using the drill through capabilities, or having somebody to link to this cube, or sending SQL queries. I have a demonstration which allows you to build a dimension and cell security. So as I mentioned before, you can actually go and, for example, create a new role. I'm enforcing on the client side. I'm adding a member or group. And then on the dimension tab, I can actually go and choose, for example, for the position dimension right down in here, I can make it to be, for example, a custom. And part of the custom setting on that dimension, I can actually go ahead and select pretty much no senior as a description for this particular role. And on the members, I'm going to choose pretty much all position, and I'm going to just make sure that I'm not selecting senior management, as you see on this slide. So I say no senior, and I'm just removing the senior management. And as you see, a portion of the data will be hidden. And on the advanced tab, pretty much I can take a look at this on DX, and you see on the denial actually is referring to that particular level. On the common tab, as you see, we can take a look at the visual tools right in here. Remember that they are disabled because it contains a distinct count. The visual tools cannot exist in cubes containing distinct count measures. That's why we can't show it. So we're going to just click OK, and I've created a new senior for the position as a custom setting. So on the cell itself, I can actually go and pretty much select advanced in here, and for the read permission, I'm just going to choose custom, and let's go and change this a little bit, and I'm going to just call it hide salary info for middle, for example, managers. I don't want to show people's salary in there. As far as the MDX itself, I can actually go ahead and click on this build button, and automatically brings up the MDX builder for me. What I can do, I can actually go with the current member name. So right down in here on the members, I can go with the current member. And for the position, I'm choosing position as a dimension. And I go with the name of the current member, which is a property of it. I say if it's not equal to middle management, I use or, and then I go and repeat this again, because you never know for the case sensitivity. We go with middle management, and also we go with, again, current member right down in here, and choose the measures name. We go with employee salary. So in other words, I'm actually setting a rule in here that see what can do and what cannot do. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mix these two together. So I say either you're not a management, or if you are a management, part of a management, I don't want to get the salary. In other words, I don't want to get either manager or the salary itself. So this gives users the ability to view all non-middle management salary information, not necessarily the management salary. So I click OK, I check it, everything is good to go, and then click OK, and that gives me kind of the security I was looking for. So as you see, it's very, very open to what kind of security you want to show and what not to show. And then of course I click OK in here, and now we can go and test it. We could go test to see if our role is good or not by clicking on test role. This is extremely important for us to see what's going on. So right now, on the Cube browser, if I drag the position in there, I'm dragging the position in there, drag the department out there. This is my position. So for the middle salary, as you see, for the middle management, I'm not showing anything. So that's the security. As someone who is an anonymous, I'm not be able to see, the middle management information in any way. So I'm not showing that information whatsoever, but I can show anybody else's salary, not just middle management tool. So this demonstration pretty much showed you how to work with the securities in both databases and the Cube. You have a lab in which you're going to implement Cube security in this chapter, and that will conclude the security chapter.